Welcome, everybody, to Data Innovation Summit 2020. I'm here with two great guests to talk about how to build human-centered and explainable AI models and products. Please feel free to introduce yourselves. Patrick?
All right, so I'm Patrick Couch. I work with IBM. I work as a business developer focusing on artificial intelligence and cognitive technologies. So I work within what IBM has branded Watson. And in addition to that, I also work as a spokesperson. IBM doesn't really have evangelist roles, but we have spokespersons who are out and about talking about their various expertise areas. So mine is AI and the implications of AI. So that's what I do for IBM.
Excellent. Vivien?
Thanks. I'm Vivien Tran-Thien. I'm a director of AI consulting at Dataiku. And basically, I help Dataiku's customers implement AI projects.
Excellent. Cool. So let's get started immediately. This is a topic that everybody has top of mind, ethics and explainable AI. And sometimes it can feel a bit vague. So let's try and make it concrete. Why don't you guys tell me what human-centered and explainable AI is to you and why it's important? Patrick, how about you start it off?
Yeah, sure. No, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of talk now about artificial intelligence in the light of ethics and morals and accountability, explainability, morals, the whole thing. That was perhaps previously the domain of the humanities in the academics. And it's a bit of a novelty now, I think, for the tech community to be so heavily focused on ethics. But I think it is a correct focus. I think AI as a label for a lot of different technologies is so transformative that we need to give thought to ethical implications of AI. And I think when it comes to human-centric AI, I think the main idea is to make sure that these powerful capabilities that we are now standing up are understood by the user, basically, or the user, us humans, in a way that makes it possible for us to make sure that the technology serves the purposes that we have given it.
Excellent. Yeah. And Vivien, what do you think? Or what do you say?
Yeah, I agree with all this. For me, human-centered AI refers to the use of AI, which takes fully into account the implications of these uses on people, taken either as individuals or communities, or more generally as a society as a whole.
Right. Can you both perhaps, let's see if we can make this concrete. Can you share examples of AI ethics challenges that you personally have faced at customers? And if it was overcome, then how was it overcome? Because I don't want to make the assumption here that these are trivial challenges that can be overcome. In some cases, maybe, it might put a stop to a project. What do I know? Patrick, what do you say?
Yeah, no, you're right. And these are challenging challenges for AI. And a lot of these challenges in terms of ethics relate to the data required to get the magic out of the technology, right? And I think over the years, we've seen a tremendous amount we've seen a lot of funny, weird, sad, tragic examples of AI applications gone wrong. And I mean, IBM was exposed to this early, maybe 2 years ago, when there was an MIT study showing biases in facial recognition software. And IBM immediately addressed this and put this on the agenda for IBM research. So we tried to overcome the challenges within bias in data sets for AI applicability by taking the bull by the horns, basically, and working with it. So IBM set up this whole program for mitigating AI biases in AI, and it's been a continuous struggle. And I think the most clearly sort of examples of how to address this is the fact that IBM has commercialized, made available to the open source community, created products, all with the purpose of mitigating bias difficulties. But you're right, it hasn't been overcome as much as it has been acknowledged as something that we need to continuously address and work with.
I see. Vivien, what do you say? Have you come across this in projects that you've been involved in?
Yes, I've had quite an interesting use case with interesting ethical implications. So in a previous life, I was helping a public health agency, which was responsible to organize health inspections for restaurants. And this agency wanted to use online reviews to target inspections. And it raised interesting ethical concerns. And there were two main concerns. The first one was that not all consumers use smartphones or mobile applications in the same manner. So there could be a fairness issue in the sense that if you are not in a demographic group that uses this kind of technologies, then maybe your voice is less heard. And also, if you are a restaurant and your consumers happen to use these kind of technologies, maybe you will be inspected more often. So is it fair? Is it not fair? And the second concern was that basically the idea was to use the plain text of the online reviews. So it was possible that you used for your predictions words that reveal the type of restaurant, like is it a French restaurant or a German restaurant or an Italian restaurant?
Right.
And then it's interesting because like it's not like the nationality of a person, because of course it would be forbidden to you to discriminate on the basis of the nationality of a person. But in a certain way, the type of restaurant may be correlated with the nationality of the business owner, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And also what is interesting is that there might be legitimate reasons to use this kind of information. For example, if you are selling Japanese food with sushis or makis or sashimis, maybe there is a stronger health risk. So it might be legitimate to use this information.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite an interesting example of ethical concern. And basically at that time, my recommendation was that it would be interesting to train the model with the online reviews as they are without changing them. And then with Explainable AI, the idea was to look at the words that were the most influential.
Right.
And if we realize that the words corresponding to the nationalities of the restaurant didn't contribute to the predictions, then we are mostly fine. And we may want to just blacklist these words, and then we won't have any problems.
Right.
If we realize that they have a strong influence, then we will need to look at this more in detail with domain experts to realize to what extent it could be legitimate to use this information.
That's a super interesting problem. And I'm curious to hear, in your opinion, if you felt like you were able, that it could be overcome, or if it's more of a process that's managed continuously as you work with it. I mean, is it something that you can we fix these types of ethical concerns?
I think we can address them, but it's clear that it's clearly not only a problem for the data scientist. Because, for example, I've never been in the kitchen of a restaurant, so I wouldn't be able to interpret all this data, but it's a matter for which you need to work closely with the domain experts, because they are able to interpret what you discover in the data. And then it's also important, I think, to involve the decision makers.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's them who are responsible to enforce the values of their organizations. And it's not your place as a data scientist to take this kind of decision. And often it's a judgment call. It's not a black or white situation. So you need to have a fine-grained analysis. And then it's important to be able to convey all these ethical dilemmas to decision makers.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you're very right. I think it is not black and white. It's not right or wrong. It's not binary, which makes this, Robert, more of a managed process, I think, than something that we tick it off and then we go on to other things. And I think what you touched upon, Vivien, is also very true in regards to value alignment with the company's values. I think this is a much more fruitful way of thinking about the ethical problems from a business perspective. I mean, people have been discussing ethics forever, and we haven't sorted it out yet. It's an ongoing conversation. But what we can do is make sure that the various applications that we stand up and the capabilities that we make available do align with whatever company value that we want to promote. So then at least, you know, within the business that we're conducting, we can make sure that we run a tight ship. But I think beyond that, I think it is much more a question of having an ongoing conversation what those values should be. I mean, there are certainly different value systems in various cultures, and we see this playing out, you know, globally in terms of China, Europe, the US, going about things slightly differently in terms of data privacy, for instance. But it's not saying that one is right and the other is wrong. It's just different points of view, and we need to make sure that we make available and possible this type of conversation, and therefore, you know, the human-centric explainability is very important, more so than, say, the best ethics.
Okay, I think we can split the conversation there, because explainability certainly is something that has taken a lot of the time of these conversations, whether or not we can understand why certain decisions were made. So if we do have two classes of problems, we have the explainability, and then we have the bias of the models. And I'd like to hear just your thoughts on one thing. With regards to the bias of the models, it seems that all of the models that are biased are trained to be like humans and trained on human decision-making. So we're perhaps trying to make a model that's like a human, but good. Because you never see models that are biased on detecting brain cancer or something like that, right? It's always a model that's trained on police actions in the past, or credit givers' actions in the past, and that kind of thing. Could we perhaps simply, by adopting a better scientific methodology, get rid of a lot of these biases? Or do you feel that bias in the colloquial sense of the word is inherent in machine learning? Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think there is probably, you know, a very scientifically technological deep explanation that you could bring forth in terms of answering that vis-a-vis the data. But I think there is no reason for us humans to transfer our biases into the technology. I don't think that's a law. You know, I think it's a strong tendency. It's certainly a human tendency to sort of think of your own outlook as if not a very good outlook, then at least, you know, a predominantly norm-centered outlook. But that's just, you know, your fault in circumscribing the data set that you navigate within. But I think we can, by putting the spotlight on this, we can certainly make sure that the way algorithms treat data is less bias-ridden than our own way of dealing with data. I think so far what distinguishes algorithms from humans is often, you know, the experience. I mean, humans bring with us all our experience that we've accumulated through life, but the algorithm may have only existed for a couple of minutes, and its experience is basically the data available to it. So I think it is possible to actually weed out a lot of these, shall we say, unnecessary biases in data sets. And I think it was Daniel from Microsoft in a panel you and I had, Robert, a year or two ago, and where he said, you know, we should require more of our technology. Why just say that it should be at the level of humans? And I thought that was very astute. I thought that was a very good, clever way of you know, setting up the problem. Expect more from technology than from your fellow human being. Why not?
Right. Vivien, what's your take on this? Is it possible to sort of disconnect the model training from human decisions? You know, we've seen high-profile cases of models that have been used for finding good candidates for a company that were trained on, you know, historical data from people's decisions. Is it possible to find other data sets, or is it merely just being cognizant of it that is the important part?
Yeah, first I'd like to react about one of the comments that you made about the fact that you don't find machine learning models on medical images that are biased. But I'm not sure that it's correct, because it's possible to be biased with like the settings of the medical imaging devices that you use. And sometimes you have a model with good performance with a certain kind of devices. But if you slightly change, for example, the contrast of the pictures, then the results are very different. And it's also possible that the people for which you use these images may be different from the general population. So I think even with this kind of application, it's possible to have biases. And then to come back to your question, definitely we can be more cautious, and there are several techniques that can be used to try to mitigate the biases. But at the end of the day, it's a socio-technical problem. So it's not possible to have a 100% technical solution. At some point, you need to use human judgment and to explicitly choose what values you should try to want to put in your system.
Right.
So, yeah.
So like a methodology, is that what you mean? Perhaps that there should be not perhaps a solution, but perhaps a methodology that you should try to follow to make sure that you're cognizant of everything?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that there are algorithmic solutions that can help us at certain points in the life cycle of your project. But at the same time, you should have a process in place to ask the right questions all along your project, since the initial framing of the project until the moment when your project is in production and when you monitor continuously that everything is fine.
Yeah. It's curious that we should land in healthcare, and I picked perhaps not the best example of unbiased AI, but the healthcare sector has a long and esteemed history of ethical thinking going back to the ancient Greeks. And depending on who you ask, some might say that it's time to rethink a lot of the ethical practices, and some say that it's served the healthcare community very well. But I think we can learn a lot about having it up front and center, at least, from them. Let's put a pin in that, and I think we can come back to it and shift back to the other aspect that we mentioned just a moment ago about the explainability of these models. And I think anything that touches humans and things that are important to them, ethics and the decisions that these models make become important. So we want to be able to explain what the models do, and we have a lot of technical solutions for those. To what degree are these technical solutions sufficient or lacking when it comes to the explainability of models? And I'd also like to challenge you to say whether or not you think this is applicable across AI, because we can always pick the worst possible example of a bank not guaranteeing a loan, but is that, are these really fringe cases, or are they just the best, most understandable examples, and every aspect of AI has these sorts of issues connected to them? What do you say, Patrick, with regards to explainability?
Yeah, so, so first off, I think explainability, we need to make possible explainability at some level. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to understand everything. I mean, I certainly do not understand how the airplane can fly that I use for flying someplace, right? But I trust that it should perform according to getting me there safely. But I would very much like the service technicians, the pilots, and some of the tech specialists to understand in detail everything about that machine. And I think the same should be true of data science and data and the machinations of algorithms. I certainly want somebody to actually be able to understand it at its core. I don't need to understand it, but I need to trust somebody to do so. And I'm thinking of the Apple Card problem, where Apple was scoring credit applicants differently based on gender, which was of course a problem. But the more interesting thing was they could not explain why the algorithm behaved that way. Nobody could. Like, there was no data scientist, no specialist at that group initially who could stand up and say, hey, the reason why it's scoring like this is exactly because of this. It sort of grew out of the conversation later on when they were doing some forensics on the data, right, that they came up with some explanation for that. But so I do think that we need to work towards explainability. I think we need to put it front and center. And I think we should think of it in terms of a hurdle to be overcome in order to achieve scale. So I don't think that we can scale out AI applications if we can't explain their workings, and because we won't trust them, and if we don't trust them, we won't use them. We may be exposed to them, but we won't embrace them, and we won't give them the buy-in that we would like to get at the benefits that they can provide. So I think it is a central problem for data science today and for business overall to address this topic, certainly.
Right. Vivien, what are your thoughts on the matter? I'd like to be contrarian on it, but I think it's more important that you get your say in all this.
I think that the explainable AI technique that we have at the moment are already quite useful, not only to address ethical concerns, but also to debug a model, for example, during the training phase, or when it's in production to provide some insights for the people using the predictions to make decisions. But at the same time, I think that the term explainable AI is quite misleading for many people because, in fact, the explanations that we get from these techniques are very basic and are in no way comparable to the explanations that a human would give. So, for example, if you imagine a system that recognizes cats on picture, a person would say, well, I see a four-legged animal, and I see the fur, and I see a tail, I see ears with a certain shape. So it would be a logical reasoning. But an AI system would just say, oh, these are the pixels that are contributing to my prediction. So it's very poor compared to what we could hope or expect. It's more analogical than logical. It's based only on low-level concepts like pixels and not the anatomical parts of the animal, for example. So at the moment, it's very far from what we could hope in a perfect world.
Right. Let's go to the next step. In terms of how we can shape the policies with regards to these. I think it's important for us to have these conversations, but perhaps there are ambitions to be had as well. Yolo V4 was just released, and now Yolo V5 is on its way out as well. And its original inventor refused to work on it because of its prevalence in facial recognition solutions that are used in parts of the world where they're used for less than good things. Is it okay to use this sort of technology, object detection, when we think it's for a good cause? Or should we perhaps forbid AI that could be used for bad things? What do you say, Patrick?
Yeah, so, well, I guess defining myself as an anarchist at heart, I think we should sort of let the technology be used. But at the same time, I'm certainly for regulations. I'm not for bans. And I think it will be very difficult to sort of instill some kind of prohibition on possibility. If I look in the rearview mirror, I've never really seen prohibitive measures being fruitful in any great extent. I mean, you can take any topic, alcohol prohibition in the 20s in the US or whatever, right?
Well, cryptography is a good example when they tried to ban very strong cryptographic algorithms in the US.
Right. And now they want to ban TikTok, and it's. I don't think that's a fruitful avenue of pursuit. But I do think that we need to work regulatory initiatives. I mean, philosophically, you could say that, well, technology is not good or bad, it's use. And the NRA guys, they are always pointing out that guns don't kill people, people kill people. And technology is sort of a bit like that. Technology is the gun, or nuclear power or gene splicing or anything, right? It can be used for good or bad. And I think prohibition is not the way forward. But I do think that regulatory measures is the way forward. And that brings us back to the challenge that we have in agreeing on what those regulations should be. I
Right.
mean, I know that similarly to the creator of Yolo, IBM this summer wrote a letter to the US Congress stating explicitly that we will cease with any general purpose facial recognition technologies. We won't do that anymore simply because of the problems. And we haven't been able to see for ourselves how we can help those limitations be overcome. So IBM has said, well, we step out of that. We certainly do visual recognition, specific purpose technologies, but not these general ones where we just allow people to, do whatever with it because of that. So again, I think no, we cannot. You cannot control through prohibition. You can control through education and an invitation to the table. Very few people will have such a strong ideological foundation that they will disregard the improvement for themselves, for their loved ones, and for everybody else. You really need to be a fanatic in some sense to just say, well, screw that, burn everything, and I want to use this for evil anyway. I mean, so I think it's much better to try and get more people online, more people educated, more people fed, clothed, and given healthcare, and then those people can then use technology the way they see fit. And my belief then is that then they will use it for better rather than for worse. But hey, I'm an idealist, so
I think we'll circle back to the notion that an AI model can be a weapon in just a moment. Something that needs to be licensed out, perhaps, in a sense. Vivien, what is your take on this?
Well, when it comes to the Yolo algorithm, it's an object detection algorithm. And of course, there are many legitimate and beneficial uses of object detection. For example, you cannot build an autonomous car without object detection, or it could be useful as well for medical diagnosis. So it wouldn't really make sense to try to forbid such a general purpose algorithm. But of course, as you mentioned, I think that there are very strong concerns regarding some applications, in particular facial recognition when it's used by authoritarian regimes. So I think it's a big concern. But I think that for this question, we need to make a distinction between the technology providers and the technology users. So if you are a technology provider, for example, if you provide like an API or a pre-trained model or just the description of an algorithm in a paper, then once you provide this, it could be used by malicious users with bad intentions. And then in a way, you are partly responsible for this use. So I think it totally makes sense for IBM to be very cautious with providing this technology. But if you are a user and if you are thoughtful, cautious, if you take time to think about the implications of your use of a certain technology, there is no reason why you couldn't use this technology for legitimate purposes.
Right. I think IBM has many reasons to think about whether or not they want to make those kinds of capabilities public. And a very high-profile case was a little while ago, OpenAI made a big splash when they refused to put out the weights of GPT-2, likening it to a weapon that could be used online to spread fake news and dangerous ideas on a massive scale. Now GPT-3 is coming out and it's going to be turned into a neat service that can be accessed via an API. Can we expect these companies to self-police, or is regulation the right way, or perhaps dissemination of the knowledge to sort of normalize the correct use of it? I mean, what is the right approach here? I take it, Patrick, that you feel IBM took the right decision in that circumstance, but what is the right way on a general scale?
Right. So my preferred way forward would be, the forward escape mentality, where you, rather than work defensively and prohibitively, you work forward-leaningly and make sure that you enable, empower, and make transparent as much technology as possible, so that the market, if you will, or the market dynamics can have these the fallouts align with, you know, some kind of sense of risk mitigation. So I think that we should empower people to use technology in a judicial way, and the way to do that is by making, again, technology transparent, explainable, so that when users, when anybody who uses technology does so, can make sure that it is understood how it has been used, for what purpose it has been used, what the underlying reasons for using it are, and the agenda. And I think it circles back to, you know, the GDPR and the data, the rights to your own data, and all of that. I think as long as we make possible a solid, you know, judgment on various aspects of the use of these technologies, then it is much better to, again, you know, not work defensively, but see possibilities to the greater community. So I think that we should open up borders. I think we should, you know, take down barriers. I think we should increase transparency, and I think it's only when people are reluctant to sort of show their cards that we should, you know, bring in maybe regulations. And I certainly think that grassroots movements of political work can sort of accelerate the adoption of regulation, but I think it is more sustainable for the community to self-regulate.
Right.
But as the community self-regulates, there's always the risk of misuse and abuse, perhaps to a greater extent than if you bring regulations in. So I wouldn't like to see a free-for-all, really, but again, I think better to be open and invitational than to be defensive and prohibitive.
Well, let's continue on that thread for a moment then. If we and let's keep it practical and talk about GPT. I think one of the questions perhaps is how much of the onus of determining whether text is made by a human or a machine. You could say it argues or it falls on the recipient. So somebody reading something online has to make a decision: is this something I can believe or not? Should we be focusing on the receivers of AI decisions and products, or on the producers of AI products? What if we have maybe some kind of digital signatures for everything? Maybe that is solving it on one side. Pat, Vivien, where do you think the effort should be spent, at the source or at the receiving side?
I think at both sides, I would say, because, well, for certain cases, I think it's practical and possible to use regulation, but only for very specific applications, for example, for facial recognition. But it's true that in general, you cannot regulate in a meaningful manner innovations more generally. So I think it's also up to the civil society, like the press, the public, academics, to put pressure on these kind of organizations so that they don't do anything reckless. Mm-hmm. But also, so it would be at the source level, but also when it comes to the other side of the spectrum, I think that now that the cat is out of the box, we'll have to live in a world where we have all these powerful AI systems that exist. And at the moment, when you see something in a video, you can more or less assume that it's authentic, more or less. And when you see a text that is well written, you can more or less assume that someone wrote it.
Right.
We'll be able to make these assumptions anymore. So we'll have to find other ways to consume information or to interact with each other. And, well, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we'll need to find ways to be collectively more resilient.
Some kind of decentralized way of determining trust, perhaps, a chain of trust, a blockchain, perhaps.
Yeah, everything on a blockchain. Who knows? But what I was thinking, I think you're absolutely right, Vivien. We can't put the cat back in the bag. That's not a possibility. We can't rein it in. We can't put the brakes on this. We can't go back to the rainforest and live, the naked ape paradise of the past. We can't. We're the technology creatures par excellence. So that's just the way it is. But I do think that we should put pressure on the individual recipient to don't be an idiot, right? And act in a good, sane, solid, critical thinking, open-minded way. But we need to put pressure on the providers to make that possible. So, for instance, I would like to be able to just call up Google and say, "Hey, Google, I want to see me as you see me now. Can you just give me that? Like curate me, all the data that you have that touches me, 6-degree separation, bring it forward and show it to me, and I will tell you what I'm comfortable with and not." And before that ease is there's sort of a power of information that is unfortunate, and it resides, the way I see it, at the wrong end of that spectrum, recipient provider. So I think we need to make possible the end user capabilities for judicial use of technology. We cannot victimize ourselves to be, the victims of the provider's services. I mean, I remember before, Netflix and the streaming services, if you wanted to consume mass media, you had to suffer through the commercial breaks. And there was no possibility of saying, "Hey, honestly, I don't want the commercial breaks. I'd be happy to pay for not having the commercial breaks." But now you can. Now you can watch, a movie on Netflix instead of, say, some of the commercial channels, and you won't have advertising during your enjoyment of whatever you're watching. And I think those types of technical capabilities need to be put in place for the user then to indicate in a classic market economy what is preferable.
I'd like to commend you on saying that everybody has a certain degree of responsibility, and putting it simply, you can't trust everything you read on the internet. It seems reasonable, but I don't want it either to be a cop-out to say that it's anybody's fault. We all have a degree of responsibility in trying to use this technology in a good way. So let's spin this in another direction, because I am respectful of the difference in scale of what this technology can do. Because when you talk about what Google knows about you, you feel like it's reasonable to ask that of Google, but you might not feel that it's reasonable to ask that of me. Tell me everything you know about me, and right? But it's different what Google can do with that information in practice, and so it's only reasonable. But I think the amount of good that can be done with this technology is simply not talked about enough, because a lot of people see the Terminator when they talk about AI. And so I'd like to hear some nice examples from you of where AI can be used in a good way. I do read about people that say that they're very comfortable with letting a computer make a decision, because they think that computer has the potential, at least, to be less biased than a person sitting in a booth. What are your thoughts on that? What do you say, Vivien?
Well, for me, the two domains for which I'm the most optimistic about the prospects of using AI for good are the medical sector. And there the hope would be that we would all be able to get personalized medical diagnosis, for example, even in the regions of the world which are currently not, which don't have good medical infrastructure. And the second domain would be, for me, education. So what we can see is that most of the educational systems are very monolithic. Like all the students are treated the same, but the hope with AI would be that we could have a personalized curriculum and a personalized teacher for every single student. And it would be a massive change compared to the system that we have now.
I think that's a really nice message to end on, because we're very focused on our own issues. And there are a lot of places in the world where this can have a massive impact and do a lot of good. What about you, Patrick? What would you like to close on? The good that AI can do?
Well, I think AI can do a whole lot of good, and I think it's already doing a whole lot of good. It's just not doing it enough, and it's not doing it broadly enough. So I think when people talk about the promise of democratization through participation or availability of information, I think that's a goal worth pursuing. We want everybody online, all 10 billion people in 2100 or 2100. We want everybody online. We want everybody to have access to all the personalized biometrical capabilities of medtech. We want everybody to have access to the best personalized recommendation engines on Netflix, but also, when it comes to financial aspects and work, we want everybody to have access to everything. And I think that can only happen digitally. Like materially, that's not possible, right? I mean, we already have Earth Overshoot Day happening earlier and earlier every year. So everybody can't have the same material standards as everybody else. But perhaps we don't need to. So perhaps AI can be this frog leaping of future improvements that we can get at through going the digital route, and then have that feedback into the material world that we live in, so that we can get more optimized food chains, more optimized healthcare, better financial services across the board for everybody, so that we can actually, by using and leveraging the promise of AI, make sure that the material side of humans conducting themselves over time to actually be sustainable for a long time, because that would be very interesting to me. I would love to have a sneak peek into a future that actually exists in 500 years. I mean, that would be mind-blowing, right? And
500 years is a long time.
yeah, it is, right? But we've been around for a couple of 100,000
Yeah.
the way we are now. So I think, why not be ambitious? So why not say that, put the measures in place so that we can use AI for the betterment of everybody? I don't think that's a lofty goal. I think that's a pursuit worth pursuing.
I agree.
Go for it. And I think you are right, by the way. I think that we tend to talk a lot about the negative things, the hurdles, the problems, and not, the great future that we could actually stand up. And I think that is unfortunate. And I think we should all, try and bring forth positive energy into this domain, because it is certainly needed.
Excellent. Thank you guys for your perspective today. This has been one of my favorite sessions so far. I hope that people watching enjoyed it, and I will be seeing you at the next session. Thank you.